Hello there and welcome. This is, as always, Mikhail or Michael speaking, and before I start this video, I just want to say thank you all who decided to support me financially, be it through Patreon, PayPal or Super Thanks. I really appreciate your help and generosity, so thank you friends and have a blessed day. Now today's video we will start in the general Kharkov direction and first discuss Russian capture of two villages that goes by the names of Staritse and Bugrovatka. Overall, this was a result of highly successful Russian assault in this area, which took place all across this wider front. To the west and southwest of the Vovchansk city, at first reports suggested that Russians successfully crossed through this forest, entered the village of Bugrovatka, and established a bridgehead. And now, about 24 hours from that initial report, we see that Russians successfully took not only Bugrovatka, but Staritse village as well. In general, this is how much territory overall Russian forces were able to capture from the Ukrainian side within the last 24 hours. Now, as you can see, this is a pretty big chunk of territory, but of course the most painful for Ukrainians and substantial for the Russians was the capture of Staritse and Bugrovatka. With those two villages in Russian control, Russians greatly increased their overall tactical and strategical situation and will now be able to use those two villages as a staging point for further attacks across this entire front line. From this flank, let's go to Vovchansk itself and discuss the territorial gains that occurred within the city itself. All throughout last 24 hours, Russians continuously and fiercely stormed Ukrainian positions and strongholds within the city of Vovchansk itself. Like I said in the previous video, the battle for Vovchansk is not an easy task for the Russians by any means necessary, but they advance nevertheless, with constant Ukrainian counterattacks doing little to stop them. One of the reasons why Ukrainians continuously and relentlessly counterattack Russians is in order to prolong for as long as possible further Russian advances in this area. One of the reasons why is the situation with civilians. The Russian offensive in the Kharkov direction was so swift and unexpected that Ukrainians simply failed to evacuate most of their citizens. And as of right now, evacuation is still ongoing. Nevertheless, the fighting continues, and as a result of successful storming operations within the city towards the city center, Russians successfully acquired this big chunk of city territory and were not only able to maintain their control over it, but in fact continued to press forward in attempt to use their momentum. If we zoom in, we can see that Russians, for the most part, were able to take control over the most difficult portion of the city, which is this small territory of mostly high-raised buildings. Now again, those are Soviet-built buildings, and they are very sturdy against artillery and aviation bombs. So before Russians, Ukrainians were using those buildings to their advantage, and now it is Russians who will do so. The high elevation of the top floors will allow Russians to locate not only their snipers, but also anti-tank crews. This will allow Russians to not only monitor all Ukrainian positions in this portion of the city to the north of Vovchanka river, but also spot movements of Ukrainian formations to the other side of the river within the entirety of the city of Vovchansk. Unfortunately, the video that you're witnessing is lagging pretty badly, but you can still see the general situation. The city is engulfed with flames, and as of right now, continues to actively burn. It seems that after the Russians will capture the city, very little of it will be left. But again, Ukrainians are holding hard, but relentless and continuous Russian attacks put a big strain on their defensive lines, which forces them to retreat on multiple portions of the front. Then from Vovchansk, let's move towards the settlement of Tykhe and discuss Russian gain to the west of it, which looks like this. As you can see with this territorial change, Russians captured a big portion of this road and multiple tree lines, and are now able to attack along this road in the direction of northeastern outskirts of Vovchansk. And generally speaking, with Russians attacking all across this entire front within the city of Vovchansk and in its outskirts, and if the situation is not to change, Ukrainian forces will surely be forced to retreat from this residential area. Overall, the situation is now much worse than it was yesterday. All across the front, Russians are applying great pressure, and to this day, Ukrainians are unable to deal with that problem. Their counterattacks are fruitless, they've lost the artillery duel, as well as the battle in the sky. Here on this short video, you can see the work of Russian aviation on the Ukrainian positions on this front. What doesn't help is that almost all of the roads that Ukrainians are using to supply their forces on this portion of the front are now under direct Russian fire control, which greatly hinders Ukrainian evacuation efforts, supply and rotation systems. For example, as a result of successful artillery bombardment, Russian forces were able to successfully damage a portion of a bridge over the Volcha River. Here you can see this on your screens. Not going far away, let's go towards the Kharkov direction, where here Russians too saw some success. First of all, it is important to note that the Russian capture of the village of Glibke and Lukyanцы are now fully confirmed, and it seems that after Russians were able to take full control and clear those two said villages, they went on the attack from both village of Lukyanцы as well as from the village of Glibke. Here on this picture provided by Syriac Maps, you can not only see the confirmation of those two villages falling into the Russian hands, but also Russian advance within the small residential area adjacent to the Liptse village. It seems that Russians went with the safest route, because advancing through this road right in the open will force Russians to suffer extremely heavy casualties. Instead, Russians went with a much better and safer route and attacked through the Dacha area. As to how much exactly of the territory Russians are controlling is unclear. For example, this source gives Russians much more territories than Syriac Maps, while of course Ukrainians are denying those territorial gains altogether. In any way, the battle for the village of Liptse has officially begun. Now, before we move on to the other portions of the front, let's quickly clarify the situation around village of Zelene. In my last video, I said that the information coming from this particular portion of the front is most confusing, and Syriac Maps had confirmed Ukrainian control over this small village, and as you can see, marked it as Ukrainian territorial gain. From here, let's move all the way to Chasiv Yar frontline and also discuss Russian territorial gains here. If you remember yesterday, I reported that Russian forces were spotted here in this area, trying to enter the village of Kalinivka. At that point in time, it was unclear whether Russians were able to hold on to their bridgehead within the village itself, but now the information came in. As a result of successful storming operations conducted by the Russians, these were the territories that came in under Russian control within the last 24 hours. As you can see, not only Russians are able to greatly improve their general situation inside Bogdanivka village, but have now gained ability to storm Kalinivka directly. Russians have also came to the close vicinity of this forested area, which as you can see, attached to the Chasiv Yar eastern district, this one right here. I'm sure with the storming of Kalinivka, the fight for this forest will also begin. And if Kalinivka to fall and the forest to be captured, this micro-district will quickly fall to the Russian hands. So this new territorial gain, in my opinion, is very important, and we should keep a close eye on it. At the very last, let's move all the way to the Zaporozhian frontline and discuss what might seem to be a breaking news. According to the Ministry of Defense, Russians had completely expelled Ukrainian forces from Robotyne and were able to capture this god-forsaken village. I think no context is necessary, and we all know the story of this famous settlement. Of course, it is very hard to believe Ministry of Defense, as they have been reporting some inaccurate information. However, to me, it makes sense. As you can see, for some time Russians already held a bigger portion of the village itself, with the rest of it being in the gray zone, and its capture was just a question of time. Now here, as the video ends, I would like to know your opinion on this whole situation, whether the Ministry of Defense was correct in their assessment and reports, and what consequences will the fall of Robotyne will bring to the Russians and Ukrainians. Please express your opinion in the comment section below the video. Now with this I end today's video. Hopefully it was to your liking and was informative enough. If it was, you know what to do. As always, humanity calls me to condemn all violence against human beings. Have a great day, and always remember, Russia will be free and great.